part of making images is saying you like something and that you want this world to exist, for yourself and for other people, and recreating that. And so a lot of those sort of outdoor scenes that I'm depicting, especially in this new work in Dreaming in Real Time, are scenes depicted in Georgia based on, memories or figments of imagination that I had growing up in Georgia. So they're deeply personal.
Tyler Mitchell is an American photographer, artist and filmmaker who's at the vanguard of a bright new wave of African-American creative thought and discourse. At just 27, the Atlanta-born, Brooklyn-based Mitchell has a prodigious track record. He shot editorial for Vanity Fair, M. Le Monde and British and American Vogue, notably shooting Beyoncé for the cover of the 2019 issue, the first black photographer to get an American Vogue cover. He also balances commercial work for brands such as Loewe, Comme des Garçons and Uniqlo with a big, bold career as a fine art photographer. With a body of work that's concerned with depictions of black people, the work is often romantic, joyful, occasionally harking back to impressionist painting. It is beautiful and beguiling stuff. In 2020, Mitchell became the recipient of the Gordon Parks Fellowship, named for the pioneering black photographer whose work with social justice is an important touchstone for many artists of any ethnicity. I'm Robert Bound, and this is The Big Interview with Tyler Mitchell. Tyler Mitchell, welcome to The Big Interview. As we've heard in the introduction there, your range of work, from commissions, editorial and commercial and artwork and films, and all sorts of wonderful things go into this mix. Are you using the same bit of your creativity, your vision for each bit of the work that you do? Does it come from the same place?
I like to think, or I like to hope, that all of sort of what I do, whether it's sort of commissioned or personal, is in dialogue with one another. So yeah, sure. I mean, I like to think that when you look at, a magazine cover that I do, or sort of a gallery exhibition or a museum exhibition or a film work, that you sort of see my voice in it. So yeah, I would like to think that they're all in dialogue. Of course, different things have different sort of boundaries, constraints, needs, wants, but yeah, I like to think that it's all sort of under one roof.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like that. It seems you've got a signature style, but it seems to sort of evolve for each individual thing that you do. I get the feeling that you have a very good relationship with your subjects, actually. I mean, there's such a lot of warmth, and we can talk about this in a bit. But it feels like you have a good time making these pictures. Am I far wrong?
No, not at all. We like to have a good time. I mean, I think I'm just trying to create an environment that's like as open as possible, I think that the environment I try and create, I have ideas. I like to say that I sort of bring ingredients, so to speak, but I don't know the quantities of those ingredients for the recipe. I try and leave a little bit of margin and room of open-mindedness to sort of collaborate with the people in front of the camera, because it's as much their picture as it is mine, and I'm sort of creating an aesthetic world, but they're, the sitters and the people who I work with to make that are also a part of it. So yeah, I would say it's good that comes across. It's good that when you sort of see, in a lot of my work, and I can make you feel good, the sort of direct gaze into the camera, the sort of eye contact made is usually a very inviting sort of eye contact, I hope, where it's sort of it has some sort of potentially enigmatic quality, but it has warmth, like you said. So yeah, I think all of that is what I'm sort of looking for, so subconsciously, I would say.
Yeah, you mentioned there, making an environment in which to take pictures. And that's such an important part of the photographer's arsenal, isn't it? To be able to create that kind of giving, trusting environment. There's kind of an amount of trust involved, isn't there? In allowing someone to take your picture. Is that something, I mean, that's an evolving story, right? But do you have you seem to have a lovely way about you, but is that where it sort of starts from?
I mean, yeah, that is sort of where it starts from. I think it's something to be taken seriously, it's something to just be taken with gravity. I try and maintain that, on everything I do. I don't know if I can put my finger on what it is, but I think it's also good that I've been making images for quite some time. So the people, the sitters, I show them some of my work and they start to get an idea of what it is that I do. Or if I ask to do a shoot with them, then they sort of might even have an idea already. And so then they sort of know, and then the relationship starts off with that knowledge, and then it goes from there. I think every photographer sort of has their own approach to this.
When I first saw your work a while back, was whether you're capturing a world or whether you're creating a world, because you're not a documentary photographer, but you're still capturing kind of these moments of intimacy, of love, of closeness, of dialogue. Are you stealing something from the world, or are you making something new, I wonder?
I think a bit of both. Like the funny thing is like it sort of walks this line of like documentary and staged. Like for sure there, like you're saying, there are staged elements, but I sort of like to think that I'm doing both. Because I mean, when you see sort of the scenes depicted in my images, my sitters, so to speak, are sort of playing on a narrative that is real, whether that is sort of flying kites or enjoying sort of interpersonal relationships in a park or an outdoor space. Like all of those moments are sort of, there are moments that happen in real life, and then there are also moments that I've constructed in that particular moment for that photograph. And I think that construction doesn't take away from the sort of reality of the moment.
Do you shoot all the time? I mean, you've got a phone in your back pocket, and I'm sure you're making notes, as it were, photographic notes and things you like and things you dig and things that are constructed photographs. Is that how you think of it? That every image is kind of worth its place on your camera roll? It just takes you just delete what you delete in the edit.
Actually, no, I'm pretty like considered when I shoot. Like I even like my camera roll is like a very different sort of like thing than sort of my like photographic practice. Like my photographic practice is like a very focused thing.
Hmm.
I'm very much like sort of gathering references. I'm thinking about scenes. I'm sort of dreaming up frames. I'm sort of sketching ideas. I'm looking at movies. I'm researching, and then I'm going out into the world and creating these things. So it's sort of two different things. Like even though, that accessibility to shoot always on the iPhone is there for sure, I don't think that in my mind, connect the two,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. And I think I like that it's kept separate, because for me personally, it's almost like making images for me is almost like the act of being a director of a movie. In a way, it's about doing the research, coming up with an idea, and being very focused and decisive about it, and then going and trying to like do service that idea the best way you can.
Yeah, I mean, I get a sense of meticulousness from your work. You know what I mean? I mean, these constructed images, which you obviously think deeply about the light, the relationship of people's bodies and their bodies in the landscape and the colours and all the rest of it. I don't for a second think it's a throwaway thing. I think we'd all love to see your iPhone photo roll as well, though, Tyler.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
That's
you
the
probably
vault, isn't it? That's the bank vault that we want to crack.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And you mentioned, and people will be familiar with this, some of the things that appear in your imagery, flying kites, this idea of a kind of almost performative leisure there is in your work. Is that fair to say? I mean, I want to ask you about, this seems like Renoir or Seurat or someone, which was Frenchmen painting white French people, 150 years ago or whatever. And this seems, the imagery that you are inventing seems to be very much of making a new narrative. How do you define that? I mean, you're allowing people, I suppose, black people like yourself, to have those signs of luxury and leisure that have never been tropes of that imagery before, I suppose. And it hits people between the eyes because of its rarity, the way that things look. We're not used to seeing that, which has struck other commentators and critics as sad and rather guilt-making, perhaps, as well.
I mean, I think there's one conversation which is sort of me making the images, and then there's sort of another pole or side of the conversation which is between the viewer and the images, and I sort of have no role in that. Like that's sort of why I'm saying I'm sort of on one level flattered that those names come up for you as sort of a reference. But to be honest, these works and these pictures that I'm making are sort of stemmed from personal experience. They are sort of a culmination of looking, more towards a lineage of Black image makers, more towards Roy de Carava's work, more towards Gordon Parks's work, more towards, the Comminges workshop photographers or Dawood Bey or Dina Lawson, than they are sort of George Seurat. But I think like, and then most importantly, above any of those other image makers or artists, it's about looking inwards into sort of the experiences I've been lucky enough to have in my own life. Like a part of making images is saying you like something and that you want this world to exist, for yourself and for other people, and recreating that. And so a lot of those sort of outdoor scenes that I'm depicting, especially in this new work in Dreaming in Real Time, which is for my upcoming gallery show are scenes depicted in Georgia based on, memories or figments of imagination that I had growing up in Georgia. So they're deeply personal. And so I think that's my side of the conversation. And then I think the viewer side is sort of, I have no stake in it. I sort of almost like there's no conversation for me to have there. It's between the image and the viewer. And I think that's sort of the fun part of photography, right? Is that everybody brings their own sort of personal experience, historical experience, and sort of narratives to imagery.
I love that you can only bring the viewer so far, right? I mean, it's like what they say about reading a novel, right? Sometimes it can be a very rich experience because the reader has to do a little bit more work, and that's what you're asking, or that's what you're expecting the viewer to do, right? You can take the horse to the trough, but you can't make him drink, I suppose.
Well, I mean, I think a novel actually has ways to be more descriptive than a photograph, even. I mean, a picture is a thousand words, they say, but like, you know, a novel can be quite didactic in exactly how it wants you to feel throughout. It can take you through a narrative and sequence, and this happened and then this happened. You're presented with an image and it starts to work on your mind, and on none of those levels, actually, it starts to work on a subconscious level, on a visceral level. And so I sort of can, call my own personal experience, my own lived experience to a certain degree, but I can't dictate, or this isn't a didactic experience when someone comes into contact with my images. And so I think that's actually beautiful. And I think I have no role in that conversation at that point.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to live in a lot of your pictures because they're so warm. They're like halcyon days.
That's part of it too. Like I want to live in them. So I mean, I think that's what art on some level is like. It's offering narratives, sort of personal escape as well.
Yeah. That idea of beauty is sort of under recorded in a lot of contemporary work, isn't it? That idea of not beauty for beauty's sake, but a simple celebration of it. Is that something that you bear in mind, or is it the way that it's been coming out for you that way, Tyler?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I'm becoming like less concerned with like the contemporary moment, so to
Yeah.
speak. Like not because like not I mean, the contemporary moment is very anarchic. Like I don't think you could really pin down like, oh, this is what this moment is about. Like maybe you could point out some aesthetic signifiers or like things that feel quote unquote contemporary or modern or whatever. But I mean, the thing that I'm most interested in or ask myself all the time is like, is this thing I'm making singular? And is this thing I'm making, singular to me? Like, does it come from who I am as a person? And like these things I'm sort of like bearing in these images are sort of my personal interests, like you said, this is a world that I sort of want to live in. And that's all I can sort of concern myself with. All the rest of like where it sits in the canon or how it sits in the canon or that's all like time's decision. That's all other people's decision. That's sort of not my work to do. But I'm just sort of here trying to make work that I hope is singular.
Yeah. But it's funny being in the position now where you can read about yourself in different august journals all around the world, and people try to communicate to their readers what your narrative is, what your preoccupations are, what your politics might be. It's nice to be able to step away from having to define everything yourself, or is that a bit of a frustration? Can it be a bit of a frustration?
No, I'm not worried. I'm not too worried about like defining everything myself. I mean, life is so, there's so many shades of gray in it that it's like there would be no point for an artist to try and define everything themselves at all. Like that's just sort of like I was saying, not the artist's role. And so I think like my role is to sort of make the stuff and hope that it impacts some people, offers people a narrative that inspires other things, that propels the human condition forward, that propels, sort of life forward.
You mentioned that your upcoming gallery show, this focuses on, or the inspiration is from your childhood in Georgia. Tell us about that, because you're kind of not as far away, sadly for me, from your childhood as I am from mine. I mean, was that a very documented childhood? Were you taking pictures? Were your parents taking pictures? Your family? Is it easy to find the source material, Tyler, for your upbringing?
I think it's funny because the pictures that I've made for this upcoming body of work sort of reference and speak to so many things. One thing that I'm kind of calling it above everything else is it's really a landscape project.
Mm-hmm.
It's really a project that's sort of invested in the history of people's relationship to land and to landscape. And I say that in quotation marks with a capital L, like the formal idea of landscape. And so, no, I don't have tons of, landscape pictures laying around my house that I could look at, or I didn't have tons of, but I am deeply researched, and I was looking at, books that Deborah Willis would show me, like Picturing the South, images from, sort of the American South from 1880 to the present. I was looking at Gordon Parks projects in Kansas, right, or in Alabama. I was looking at tons of things. And then I was also thinking about sort of, well, I mean, the title itself of the show is Dreaming in Real Time, right? So these images, like we just discussed, are sort of staged, and I sort of am also pulling figments of my imagination, even if I don't have the reference material in my home or whatever. I'm sort of imagining, what my contribution is to a visualization of, quote unquote, right, capitalization, the American South. Yeah, I think this series of pictures is just what comes out of all of those considerations. That's all it is.
Yeah. I mean, what about you grew up, in a very mediated age, right? With, you're a kid of the internet. What is it? Do you have to reconfigure how you think in terms of that, of some of that imagery to be showing in galleries, or when the intention is for those pictures to be in a gallery first and foremost before anywhere else, before they're covered in magazines and things
Right.
like that?
Well, I mean, commissioned versus personal. It's like, yes, they all, gallery versus magazine, or gallery versus theatrical screen, or theatrical screen versus magazine, or magazine versus Instagram. Like, all of these mediums are mediums, right? They all have sort of different boundaries and constraints and considerations, and all the rest. Basically, you have to take those things into consideration, but I sort of look at the gallery space or the white cube as hopefully a space that I can make sort of bend around my emotional needs, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's a space where it becomes another outlet for my ideas, essentially. And I'm interested in like how the white cube can sort of bend around my ideas and what I'm doing, rather than the other way around. I'm not sort of interested in sort of necessarily like conforming, right, to sort of the needs or questions of the white cube historically, but rather sort of wondering about personally how it can be an extension of my ideas. And I think that's, if there's anything that is contemporary about my work, maybe it's that like the contemporary moment has much more of an investment in sort of the personal journey than it does about sort of questions of canon or history, or all of those things are important to be aware of, and precision is important, but I think that we're a lot more interested in this contemporary moment sort of in personal journey, right, and a lot more gray area, rather than everything being sort of right or wrong, or this doesn't fit in the white cube. There's a
Yeah.
lot more space for sort of artists to sort of take hold of that space and figure out what works about it for them.
I wanted to ask you about the skating culture in the suburbs of Atlanta growing up. How has that played into your work? I mean, that's quite a dreamy, collegiate, friendly world, isn't it? The world of skateboarding.
I mean, friendly, dreamy, I don't know. I mean, I think like
Sorry,
I think
I'm the last person to be putting words in your mouth. Sorry.
the world of skateboarding is something that I was lucky to find so early. I'd say that like it expanded my horizons. Like, one thing about skateboarding is that it is like it can be cutthroat. It's a sport, right? But it's also a sport that's sort of based around camaraderie before it is based around sort of competition. And maybe that's because like I always theorize or think that it's maybe because it's not really a team sport, right? It's like a we're going to beat them sort of thing, but it's like a you're going to sort of beat your personal best sort of thing. So everybody's sort of encouraging one another to like do their trick better than they did it before. So I would say in that way, it definitely encouraged like a certain sense of like community. And it brought me just to other perspectives in Atlanta, right? Because your perspective of the world is so infinitesimally small when you're like, in middle school or in high school. Like, you literally see the school halls, you see your home, you see your friends, you see a couple of like I don't know, we all play the same sports. We go play soccer after school or whatever. But like skateboarding became this thing to like see just like a bigger community and bigger perspectives within Atlanta. So if there's any like credit owed to skateboarding in this like work that I'm making now, or if there's any sort of like connection to the world of skateboarding, it's in that sort of eye-opening community sort of look at Atlanta, if that makes sense. And just like a range of backgrounds, right? Because another thing about like a middle school or a high school is that it's so regionalized, it's so localized, it's so sort of constrained socioeconomically to like one or two backgrounds. But skateboarding, it's like the kids that find themselves skateboarding are from all over, right? It's got grit to it, you know what I mean? And so like that really is something that I sort of value.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tribe, I guess, isn't it? And what turned you onto it? Was it the skateboarding itself? Was it kind of being part of a different group? Was it you just have a deep-seated love of baggy clothes and Vans?
I mean, I honestly got obsessed through like I don't know, like I don't remember how I exactly found it, but once I was hooked. And like I taught myself, with using YouTube tutorials of like, here's how to do tricks, here's how to do this. And like it was very much a solo act for me at first until I found that community. I mean, I do remember growing up like being just a Tumblr kid, like being obsessed with, there's a website called The Barracks, which was a secret skate park in Los Angeles that felt like some faraway land. And I saw people like for the first time, I remember seeing people like Tyler the Creator actually, and like Odd Future, his whole collective, like in that Barrack skate park, in that secret skate park in LA. And I was like, I've never seen kids that look like me and that sort of feel like they dress how I want to dress and like act in a certain way that I really sort of respect. Like I was like, sometimes you have to see it to be it, or what have you. And so like some of the internet exposure, whether it was through Tumblr or through Odd Future, through the Barracks, was like huge for encouraging me.
Were you shooting stuff? You were shooting films then, right? Rather than
I was mainly more of a filmmaker. Like I sort of, there's a whole art to the sort of filming of skateboarding, and I got obsessed with that, and so I was really a filmmaker.
yeah, there is that shooting things from really low down, all the angles that there are in skateboarding films, right? That are very specific, that have been stolen by like snowboarding and things, but they're really specific to that genre, aren't they?
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I wanted to ask you about. We talked at the beginning, Tyler, about feeling like you get on very well with your subjects. That there's a real warmth. There's a warmth between the lens and the sitter. Um,
Yeah.
and so, tell me about people like Kamala Harris and Beyonce, people that are used to having. They've got a great sense of their own personhood and agency, and kind of make decisions about their own images quite often. Is that a different undertaking, or is that just another friendly person who digs your work who's sitting for you? How are those relationships?
No, they're great. Those were both extremely collaborative experiences, and I try and, make them feel and be like my other, sort of the rest of my body of work.
Hmm.
And luckily I think they do. Those are both assignments I'm very proud of.
Yeah, I mean, we people will probably know this from you, that you were the first black photographer to shoot a Vogue cover for 120 years. You mentioned Gordon Parks, the great photographer. You're on the Gordon Parks Fellowship, all the rest of it. Is it tiresome to be felt that you're being part of a movement, that you're part of changing history, or is it something to be? Is it just another part of your practice, or is it something that you feel people are putting a crown on your head because of it? I wonder.
I think my responsibility is to my work, and to the things I create, and to how that and how that sort of positively impacts people. Again, viscerally or subconsciously, I think that's a really great thing, and I'm really proud of the work that I make. So I think like that's sort of my first and foremost responsibility. Like I sort of don't consider much else really.
No,
And,
no, it's for
yeah,
other people, right? To fill in
yeah,
the yeah, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I can't not ask a photographer of note about what they first fell in love with, the imagery that they first fell in love with when you were a kid, and the camera you captured that on, Tyler.
I think it was an old Canon DSLR. I don't remember the specifics, but it was a DSLR. I remember like it was like it had a video and a photo mode, which was kind of cool because you could switch from like one to the other, and I thought that was really nice. I mean, skateboarding, like I was saying, like I think it was really the skateboarders at the start. Um, that was sort of what fascinated me, and it wasn't much else. It was just like, oh, I'm really interested in the sport of skateboarding. I didn't really think about any of that other stuff until like later in life. Like I said, my sort of horizons were very small, and I think that that's fine. That's how you sort of come into this world.
Yeah, yeah, I love that, and it's interesting. I think you sort of said that your horizons are small at that point, and your upcoming show is about landscapes. It feels like you know, you're thinking about it very deeply, but you're making work that is that seems to be evolving very quickly as well.
Yeah, Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
We're going places.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tyler Mitchell, thank you very much for joining us on The Big Interview.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
My thanks to Tyler Mitchell, whose Gordon Parks Fellowship culminated in the current show titled An Imaginative Arrangement of the Things Before Me, which is on at the Gordon Parks Foundation in New York until January the 2nd next year. That's it for this edition of The Big Interview. The Big Interview is produced by Emma Searle and edited by Steph Chungu. From me, Robert Bounds, thank you very much for tuning in.